I don't know that anybody's missing today, but I don't know that someone might not tomorrow. Yes, Matthew.
Are you doing the end of your poem thing?
What?
The end of your poem, like last year you memorized a poem you had to recite to class.
You mean, am I asking you to memorize a poem?
No, just like anyone, like last year where it was like...
You can do a poem if you want to.
Okay. Because I thought you said that earlier.
No. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but at the end of the year, there was a thing where you memorized a poem and recite it in class.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's
No, but if you want to, go for it. Yeah, it was because we were doing poetry, but I think you should every year and recite, frankly. But no, I didn't ask you. But if you have one, you go. We will listen. Okay. No, well, can we not do it today? Is it okay if we don't do it today? Because I have a lot to say, but save it. All right, Art of the Week. Very famous, you've probably already seen it. It is called School of Athens, and it is by a painter named Raphael, who is not a Ninja Turtle. He is a contemporary of Michelangelo, also not a Ninja Turtle. And he is one of the, Michelangelo, is that one of them? Okay, so I'm not really up on my Ninja Turtle. I don't really know. This painting is in the Vatican. It's in the Vatican Library, the room where the Pope signs official documents. And I actually didn't see. Now I'm going to read to you from my notes. I'm not that smart. I just take notes. It is in a room with 4 paintings on 4 walls, obviously, and the 4 subjects are theology, law or justice, poetry, and philosophy. This is philosophy. And it is opposite theology on opposite walls. So the insinuation being that the Pope needs all 4 of these things, needs a knowledge of all of these things, and that philosophy was a handmaiden to theology, that philosophy led these guys as far as they could go towards truth, right? But when the church arose, they took the specific Greek terminology hashed out by these guys and applied it to theology. And so it gave us the words. You know, it's really hard to say something if you don't have words for it. Little kids get really frustrated, don't they? They don't know the word. They want it, but they don't know the word. And so the early church was trying to explain, what does it mean that he's God and he's man and he has 2 natures, but they're not fused together, and how many wills does he have, and what? How do we express that in words? Greek philosophy gave them the words. So it is not inappropriate that this would be in the Vatican. So in the center we have, I don't want to take a lot of time, but I'll pass it around. I'm sure you've seen this painting before, though. We have Aristotle and Plato in the middle. And on the older man is Plato. And he is holding under his arm the book Timaeus, the Timaeus, one of his dialogues. It is the only one that the West had in the Middle Ages. There was no other Plato translated into Latin for them. They didn't know this. You've read more Plato than most of the West in the Middle Ages. Congratulations to you. And he is doing this with his hand. And I'm sure by now you've figured out why Plato would be doing this. Look at the forms. Look at the forms. All this stuff. No, this is just what is coming to be, as he says. It's passing away. It's changeable. It's mutable. Look to the forms. Aristotle, the student of Plato, whose work we're going to start this next week, is holding under his arm the book you are about to start reading, the Nicomachean Ethics. I will explain the title later. And he, with his hand, is doing this. No, Plato, I'm sorry. You're my teacher and everything, love ya, but I don't really believe in your forms. I don't believe there's a form of chairness. I think the form of this chair is in this chair. Like the form is what makes this thing a chair. The form of human being is what makes you a human being, not human beings in general. Aristotle's like, we don't consider things in general, do we? I don't love mankind in general. If I do, it's not worth much. I love my neighbor, who can be irritating. Mankind in general is fine. Particular people are irritating and aggravating. I didn't point to you on purpose when I said irritating. So in one picture, Raphael has shown us these two men's philosophies and the fact that they set the tone for all inquiry into thought. Because on Plato's side of the picture are philosophers who looked into the ultimate nature of things. All right? So I wrote down some of them on the back. We have, so this would be on the left. Okay, on Plato's side, lower left. Oh yeah, lower left as you look at it. This is Pythagoras writing, and he's got students showing him like the Pythagorean theorem, although, as I told you, he made a whole system of philosophy. It was heavy on reincarnation and vegetarianism. I have nothing to say about that, but, and his students are around him, but so he was not just numbers. He was numbers and geometry, but like Plato said, because it draws your mind up, right? Not just because I love numbers and geometry. He thought everything, like the guiding principle of the whole universe was number. That was the thing of which everything was made and everything was around. It was, yes. It was like if math became a religion. That's Pythagoras. We see here, sort of on his side, a man named Heraclitus. Heraclitus, as far as we know, this is a portrait of Michelangelo. Michelangelo is Heraclitus. And he's just kind of brooding. Just kind of sitting here. Heraclitus was before Socrates and Plato. And he thought everything changed. Like, that's not a very good. Everything was in flux. He's the guy who said, maybe you've heard this, you never step into the same river twice. Because the water flows past and now it's not the same river. You know, I'm always, like, hair is falling out and skin cells fall off and everything. So technically, I'm not the same person I was 10 years ago. Like, none of my cells are the same. They've all been renewed and remade, and so now I'm different. I know. You're looking like, that's Heraclitus.
Kind of makes sense. It's just a different definition of how you define river
Or not the same. In a strict material sense. Heraclitus was a materialist too. That's important. He was looking for universals, but he was following materialism. Yes, sir. I'm gonna get a drink. Oh, yes. Is it the same ship? Yes. Or if you have a house and you've mended the house so many times that now every single part of the house has been remade, it's not really the same house anymore?
You realize there's a bunch of spoilers right now.
Okay, stop. Just in case. I don't know and I don't care, but other people might. Okay. No, that's fine. But yes, exactly, Carl, that's the same idea. Exactly. On the steps, half naked and sprawling, we have our friend Diogenes. Diogenes is a crank. I don't know what else to say. He was the founder of the Cynic school of philosophy. You can't really know anything. I don't know. Nobody knows. Not like Socrates, I don't know, but I'm pursuing. Diogenes is like, I don't know and I don't care. We can't ever know. Diogenes is famous for proving that nothing meant anything by living in a barrel for a long time in Athens and like doing everything in public. I mean everything. Like and everything. He's like, that's just the way it is. That's humanity. We don't need to hide parts of it or whatever. Yeah, and so Plato's school, they were working hard to figure out what makes a man a man. How do we define man? I mean, mankind, you know? And, you know, Aristotle says he's a rational animal. But Plato's school, they said, he's a featherless biped. This is Diogenes. And so he took a plucked chicken. Yeah, behold a man. Just because he could. And also he was mocking their definition, you know, but also he's just a crank, yes.
I also like the story. I think it's Diogenes. Come to think about it, I don't know, match up, but it's like practically impossible. But where he's like sitting in his barrel and then Alexander the Great comes along. Is that's
Yeah, no, that would not, but yes, so you want to tell the rest of the story?
Yeah, so he's sitting in the barrel and Alexander the Great comes along and says, because he's heard about like, this famous man, he's like, I'll promise you anything, like even like half of my kingdom. And then Diogenes looks up and says, I'll take, can you move over a little bit, you're getting in the way of the sun.
Yeah. Get out of my sunshine. That's Diogenes. Over on the Aristotle side, we find people who are more what we would call natural scientists. Okay, so people who are concerned with this plant, this animal. I'm not looking for the form of dog. I'm actually studying this dog here, and I'm finding out about dogs. And so on his side, we find Euclid, Euclidean geometry, the geometry that we study, and you could say that is also studying a form, but it has also got much practical application. And over here, there's two guys holding globes. One of them is Ptolemy, designer of the Ptolemaic solar system, where the Earth is in the middle and the sun and all the planets go around. And off here, the very right, listening to Ptolemy, is Raphael, our painter, who painted himself in the picture, which I love. All right, School of Athens. I'm sure that you can look up, or there are people who have done a vast study and tried to identify pretty much everyone. In the background, we have Apollo and Athena, patrons of the arts and wisdom, because that's what all these guys were concerned about. School of Athens by Raphael. I'm not going to pass it around, but you can come up and take a look at it. Or you can just Google School of Athens and look at a bajillion pictures online if you want to. But I want to dig in. Okay, let's look. My students yesterday had some trouble following my chart. Okay. Maybe I need to, I don't know what I need to do to make it, or maybe it doesn't matter and we're going to go over it together and it just doesn't really matter much if we do it together or separately. But after I tell you, so here's the deal. After we go over it and you know exactly what I'm going for, could you maybe give me some feedback how I could explain it better? And so I can change the document for next time. It's too late for you, but you can save others from your terrible fate. You were the guinea pigs on this document. So we're starting in book 8, but before we go there, I'm going to go back to book 4. And at the end of book 4, Socrates really thought they were done. He thought, okay, we have figured out what justice is. We found it in the city. We found it in the man. It means having all your parts in harmony and every part doing its own job. Done. And then it's at that point that he says, it seems there are as many types of soul as there are specific types of constitution. And then he goes on to say there are 5 forms of constitution and 5 forms of souls. And he sounds like he's going to start talking about it. But right at the beginning of the next book, that's when his friends say, Socrates, what's the story about the women in common? And they interrupt him. You need to go back and explain that to us. And he spends several books talking about that, and then they get on to other topics. And book 8, he's finally going back to that. All right? He's finally remembering, I was going to start talking about the different types of constitution a person can have, or a city can have, and then how the people are like them. Just like Socrates' city is the best city. It's the best we know because he made it to be the best. So we're just granting him that. And they also looked at a person that was like his city, right? Where all those 3 parts are in harmony, that my brain tells the rest of me what to do, and my spirited part, my courageous, honor-loving part, is its ally, and it keeps my appetites under control and trains me what I should be. And he said, but you know, those can change into another form, either in a person or a city. And that's what I was having you do. So, but below the chart, I asked you, what insight does Socrates have concerning why constitutions and cities change? Why does he think his city or any city will change? What do you think, Alexander?
What I got was pretty much just natural.
He does. He says everything that, let me find it. And this is on page 216. It is hard for a city composed in this way to change, but everything that comes into being must decay. You know, if it has a beginning, it's going to have an end. That's his argument. Anything that had a beginning is going to have an end. Not even a constitution such as this will last forever. And then he says, this is how it is to be dissolved. And I'm skipping down, I'm reading sort of right above the B. There's a footnote 8, and then I'm starting right after that. Now the people you have educated to be leaders in your city, even though they are wise, still won't, through calculation, together with sense perception, hit upon the fertility and barrenness of the human species, but it will escape them. And so they will at some time beget children when they ought not to do so. Now, some of this we would consider kind of twisted and hogwash. Remember how they're sort of breeding people in his city? They're putting together the best with the best to have the best. And he's saying sometimes they will err in their judgment, and children will be born who are lesser. We might find that very problematic. But what I'd like to really point out is here's the reason why. Because they're using calculation together with sense perception. Remember, for Plato, this material world isn't the be-all and end-all, and our senses can trick us. That's why we need to study the forms, because anybody who's ever done an optical illusion puzzle knows that your senses can trick you. And so they're using observation to figure out, okay, this guy and this lady will have the perfect child, so let's set them up. They will make mistakes. And eventually you will have children coming up that aren't, we don't have as many of the best sort as we used to. You can agree with that or disagree with that, but that's his argument, okay, for his particular city. And what it's going to turn into, he calls a timocracy. Time in Greek means honor. Timocrats love honor. Now, I need to point out something too. His best city, Socrates' city, we would call it today an aristocracy. It is not, but that's not a bad conjecture. I like that. So the krasi part comes from kratos, rule, and aristos means the best. An aristocracy, we think of it as being a bunch of snooty noblemen, you know, like having their tea and a bunch of servants and everything. That's not what aristocracy really means. It means having the best people rule you, choosing the best. In a sense, who wouldn't want that? Like, in a sense, even our Republican system, one would think, one would hope that maybe when we vote, we would choose the best. And I'm not going to make comment on whether we do or not, but yes.
So it's kind of like electing a king?
Yes. Although in Socrates' city, remember, they're kind of grooming them and they're choosing them. But remember, in Socrates' city, it's very equal opportunity in the fact that if you get one of the best kids and they happen to be born to one of the lower families, they raise him up, right? And if you get a degenerate kid born into the guardian class, they move him down. So it's not a social class thing where it's not fluid, it's based on merit. Sometimes today they talk about meritocracy. Yes, exactly.
I've heard the British military is so effective, like they
Okay. And that is a system that works very well, quite frankly. When you get the best people at whatever you need them to do it, you get the best results. This, I mean, barring accident or, you know, acts of God or weird, freaky acts of nature. You know, generally, if you choose the best craftsman to make something, you're going to get the best product. If you choose the best, wisest to rule you, you're going to get the best state. But he says, so what's going to happen? And do you mind, I'm not going to read all the sections because this goes on for pages and pages. I have a bunch of stuff underlined. If you want to know where does he say that, you can interrupt me and ask. But I'm just kind of go through the system. Yes. Okay. So go to page 217. And at the top, he says, well, this isn't the first time he mentions the systems, but this is where he starts the process. And he starts saying, when your rulers join brides and grooms at the wrong time, the children will be neither good-natured nor fortunate. He's talking about what's happening as this changes. And then he goes on and he's saying, now their natures are going to be mixed, and that will engender lack of likeness and unharmonious inequality. So you get a group of people at the bottom of page 217 that stands, he says, midpoint between aristocracy and oligarchy. Oligarchy is rule of the few. Oligos means few in Greek. So the aristocrats are going to be few, and the timocrats are going to be few. But they're ruling for another reason. The aristocrats are ruling because they're the best, and the timocrats are ruling because they are honored. The oligarchs are ruling in general just because they have money. And in general, everybody can't have all the money. We know this doesn't always happen. Money tends to drain into the hands of the few. It just does. Things don't stay equal financially very long in a society. So he says, and so it starts there, Alex, and it just kind of goes for many, many pages. And for time constraints, I'm just going to kind of tell it, but feel free to stop me and say, can you help me find that in the book? I have no problem with that. So we have this degenerate sort of people. They used to be the aristocrats, but they're not. And what they really love is just being honored. They just love being, and from the outside, they still look pretty good because they don't do base things because they want to be honored. They don't do wrong because they want to be honored, but they don't do it because it is the best. They do it for another motive. And so we get a timocracy. All right. The timocracy, I didn't add, this wasn't on the chart, but I added it on mine. The timocracy is the society or person ruled by this. The spirited, it's totally fine. Hey, you know what? At least you didn't knock it off a chair on camera and just have a puddle on the floor. He knocked his water jug over, and it was startling. They are ruled by the part that loves honor, the courageous, the valorous. That's not a bad thing to be. But it's in charge, you see, not this. And I asked, what are its characteristics or values? On page 218, he says the timocracy loves victory and honor. He says towards the bottom of page 218, love of victory and love of honor. So they're going to be warlike because you win victory on the battlefield. They're going to be a little more aggressive because it gives them opportunities for honor and victory. And so, but eventually, these people, Socrates says, are going to be so wrapped up with victory and honor, and also the money required to wage these wars. It turns into an oligarchy. And when these people stop caring so much about love and honor, and they start focusing just on the money, which used to be sort of a means to an end for them. It was just to finance their wars. Now we just like having money. And he says they neglect music and poetry. They neglect the muses, the part that gets us all in balance. And they let certain parts of them run away with themselves. And he says, a man, that can happen to a man too. You have an honor-loving man. He gives these little scenarios. He says, say you have the son of a father, and he's an honor-loving man, but he gets hailed into court, and he loses all his money, because somebody set him up or whatever, and his son watches all this. It's like, I'm going to get plenty of money when I'm older. I'm going to let money be my driving force. And the oligarchic man, the oligarchic spirit. And he's not ruled by this anymore. He doesn't care about honor. It's not money. Having, that's an appetite. He cares about something that's necessary. It's hard to live with no money at all. We have to eat, and we have to have shelter, and we have to have clothes. In today's day and age, it's really hard to get by in most places without a car, unless you live in a big city that has really good public transit. And so we need these things, and we need money for them. So it's necessary desires. But he's still driven by the desires. And we get an oligarchy. So he always talks about the constitution, then the man. All right? So that's the third one. That's what was third on my chart, oligarchy. And on pages 221 and 222, he says the oligarchy cares about wealth, obviously. And they're characterized by fighting between the rich and the poor. When a few people get all the money, it doesn't take long for the people without the money to get ticked off. They're no better than me. Yeah. In this case, they would have looked at the rulers and said, they are better than me. And they'd probably be right, depending on, what you're looking at is better. Wiser, more capable, more fit to rule. But in the oligarchy, nobody's thinking that. Nobody's thinking he's better than me. He's just thinking he's got more money than me. That could be me if I just had the money. And also for the first time in this city, Socrates says we see people who run into financial distress, and they might sell all their belongings to get out of debt or whatever, and then they really don't own anything. They don't have a stake in the city. They don't own property. They're just hanging out. He calls them the idlers. And he said, whenever there's one sort of idler, there often tends to be a negative sort. Wherever, and this is not very politically correct of me, but I'm going to say it anyway, because Socrates says it, Plato says it. Wherever there are beggars, you find thieves and pickpockets. I'm not insinuating that all beggars are thieves and pickpockets, but they tend to, do you know what I mean? You tend to have that sort of thing rise up when you have those sorts of problems in society. And he said, these oligarchic societies, this is going to start happening. People who really don't care about the good of the city, because they don't really have a stake in it. They don't have a job, they don't have any property, they don't care. And he refers to them as drones. They're the drones of society, the bees in the hive that don't, he says they don't do anything. I don't think that's true that drones don't do anything, but don't tell Plato. He thinks they're useless. Oh, really? How convenient for you. Okay, so awesome. So he is right. So the drones have limited use. And just like that, these people have limited use. And so eventually, and let's talk about the man that's like that. It's not hard to see, as I'm starting to talk like Socrates, it would not be hard to see what kind of man is parallel. Somebody who just lives for money. We would call him a greedy man, a avaricious man, right? That usually is greedy, particularly about money, not about pleasures or other things. And eventually, the people, I got to look this up. Well, actually, I think it's in the next one. This is at the top of page 227. When rulers and subjects in this condition meet on a journey or some other common undertaking, it might be a festival, an embassy, or a campaign, or they might be shipmates or fellow soldiers, and see one another in danger. In these circumstances, are the poor in any way despised by the rich? On a battlefield, do you care if the guy who saves your life is rich or poor? No. Or whether it isn't the case that a poor man, lean and suntanned, stands in battle next to a rich man, reared in the shade and carrying a lot of excess flesh, and sees him panting and at a loss. And don't you think that he'd consider that it's through the cowardice of the poor that such people are rich? And that one poor man would say to another when they met in private, "These people are at our mercy. They're good for nothing. We can take them out. They're a bunch of losers." And they do. And he says at this point, the oligarchy turns into a democracy. That's what it degenerates into. And that is level constitution number 4, democracy. Please suspend, if possible, although you're going to see parallels, our modern enamoredness of democracy and the concept of democracy, and just try to enter into what he's saying, and then maybe we can come back out of it and judge. Do you know what I mean? Because you might say, well, he's not being fair to the good parts of it, but remember, Plato grew up in a democracy. Socrates was living in a democracy. It's not like these men didn't have any experience, but it was a pure democracy, not a republic. All right, there was no buffer zone between the will of the people and what happened. We have a buffer zone. It's called Congress, right? So you get the democracy, and on pages 227 and 228, he says, isn't the city full of freedom then, and license to do what you want? It looks as though this is the finest or most beautiful. And his friends say, yes, it does. You can do anything you want. And then he says, in this city, there is no requirement to rule, even if you're capable of it, or again to be ruled if you don't want to be, or to be at war when the others are, or at peace unless you happen to want it. And what about the city's tolerance? Isn't it so completely lacking in small-mindedness that it utterly despises the things we took so seriously when we were founding our city, namely that unless someone had transcendent natural gifts, he'd never become good unless he played the right games and followed a fine way of life from childhood? Isn't it magnificent the way it tramples all this underfoot? Isn't it magnificent? He's being sarcastic. It's not magnificent. Yes. And he says, these people follow their desires, but not like the oligarchic man and the oligarchic city. They need money because it's a means to an end. The democratic society just follows whatever the heck it wants to, just because it wants to. He says this, now you may, he says, always surrendering rule over himself to whichever desire comes along, as if it were chosen by lot. Do you remember their rulers in Athens were chosen by lot? But now we're choosing our desires by lot. He declares all pleasures are equal and must be valued equally. Now, listen to this. And so he lives on. You may think of this as a person. He's talking about a democratic person now who basically just lets this, like every voice here, have a vote. But it also applies to the democratic society. Yes, ma'am. I'm on the top of page 232. And so he lives on, yielding day by day to the desire at hand. Sometimes he drinks heavily while listening to the flute. At other times he drinks only water and is on a diet. Sometimes he goes in for physical training. At other times he's idle and neglects everything. Sometimes he even occupies himself with what he takes to be philosophy. He often engages in politics, leaping up from his seat and saying and doing whatever comes into his mind. If he happens to admire soldiers, he's carried in that direction. If moneymakers, in that one. There's neither order nor necessity in his life, but he calls it pleasant, free, and blessedly happy, and he follows it for as long as he lives. It is. This is what I was about to say earlier. Now you may unplug your distance and you may come back and say, is this the world we live in today? You know, it started well, it started strong, but what are our cardinal virtues? Freedom, liberty, tolerance, everything he just said. And then listen to this. I read this, first time I read this, years ago, I marked this line. I came across it again. Do you notice how all these things together make the citizen soul so sensitive that if anyone even puts upon himself the least degree of slavery, they become angry and cannot endure it? In other words, if I say, like the young people, I'm going to take an oath of purity until marriage. I'm not making you do it. I'm saying I'm going to do that. It makes people angry that you put that on yourself. Yeah, I've had family members. So I follow a religious tradition where we do a little more fasting, okay? And so I mentioned, you know, my Lenten fast. And so, you know, and I've had people argue with me about fasting. Tell them to do it. I'm doing it. I'm training myself to say no to myself because God may ask me to do some big thing someday. And I need to be ready. If I can't forego little pleasures, what am I going to do if he asks me to do something huge? I'm in training. But the point is, I didn't say, you have to do this. I said, I'm doing this. And it makes them angry. I'm sure we could think of other examples of things, you know, people say, I am putting this restriction on myself. I have decided that this is the best way for me to live. Women staying at home with their children instead of being in the workforce. I am not condemning anybody's mother who is in the workforce. But I was sometimes treated lesser because I chose not to be. One person once sat across the fence, a neighbor, and said he wished he could stay at home and have somebody take care of him. And I had 3 little kids under the age of 5. And I thought, it didn't say it, but I thought, you wouldn't live 24 hours in my house, buddy. But you see, I didn't say, all of you have to leave your jobs and stay home with your children. I said, I'm going to. And it makes people angry. What is that? Why? Maybe partly. What makes people angry at someone else's decision, even when they're not asking you to do it? What do you think, Gabby? Fear, maybe? That's fine. This is true. If we can just pull everybody down, hey, you know what it reminds me of? Everything goes back, all roads lead to Herodotus. The guy lopping those heads of wheat off, right? If anyone gets taller than the rest, you lop them off. Yeah, Matthew.
Yeah, but it's kind of like if you're ever in an argument with someone, either you know if they're doing it or if you're doing it. Let's say you're doing it, like you did something like you yelled at them, like you were the one the first one to yell, you said something stupid or insensitive, and then they're kind of coming back at you like in a very like understanding, kind of clear-headed way.
Yes.
And usually the kind of winning the argument, you get mad at them. It's like you clearly you see you're in the wrong, and you kind of know it kind of cognitive dissonance. And it's like, well, I'm not that good, but I'm going to be angry. I have to find a reason why you're actually bad for people.
Yes. Yeah, Ethan.
So some people do fasting differently. And a lot of people are for it, a lot of people are against it. A lot of people that are against fasting are the same people who
Oh, yes, yes. Okay, that is a different route, Ethan. Yes.
Why, no, don't do that. You don't have to do that. Something like that. But like they don't really understand. You know, like you would tell someone why would you use like certain standards. It's the same kind of thing.
Yes.
Why are you doing this to hurt yourself? Why are you doing this to hurt yourself?
So people could be stepping in simply not from jealousy necessarily or anger, or to keep you down, but in genuine concern and misunderstanding. Yes. Yes. All right. Concern can come across like anger sometimes, but yeah, point well taken, Ethan. But I think in this case, and in the cases, most of the cases I'm thinking of, there might be something in what you guys over here said, all of you, that they just become angry because they need to pull you down to their level. We all need to be at the same level. We need to be that wheat field where none of the heads of grain are taller than the rest. Democracy and the democratic man is the same. You know, we just live willy-nilly, basically. Whatever I feel like today, that's what I'm going to do. And of course, we all know, I feel like you guys are young, but hopefully you know, if you don't have a plan or a pattern or a habit developed, you're apt to just fall into doing whatever, whenever. It's not even physically healthy, much less emotionally or mentally or spiritually healthy. But eventually, you're going to have a society, he says, where you have this group of idlers gets bigger, all right? Because they do whatever they want, and which means they don't have a set plan. They're just kind of living life from day to day. We still have rich people. Go ahead. Yes, and then we have rich people, and then we have the working class. And he says, what happens? You know, so the idlers, and unfortunately, the only way I can read this is think, our politicians are our idlers. I know technically they have a job, but because he says the idlers are the dominant group, the loudest voice. And they engineer to take money away from the rich and give it to the working class, redistribute, and to the idlers themselves. This ticks the rich people off. It also ticks the other people off because they never think they got enough. They never think it went far enough. And so finally, this working class, he says, will find a person who represents their interests. We are the downtrodden. We are the ones the other groups are always pushing around. We never get our fair share. And here comes this person, and they're going to speak for us because this person is charismatic. This person seems wise and powerful. And they become a tyrant. And democracy degenerates into a tyranny. That the total freedom and the lack of joy that it brings leads people to look for a leader that will stick up for their interests. And once the leader gets control, he doesn't let go. Remember Pisistratus. We have someone beat us up so that we can ask for a bodyguard. If we have to dress 6 foot tall, beautiful women up and march them into Athens, I know, I always love that story. I know I mentioned it over and over because it's just amazing. It will start out, oh, I'm just righting wrongs. I'm just taking care of the imbalance in these parts. But it turns out, with him getting all power into his hands, and generally this person does not use it well. And the tyrannical man is what he talks about in Book 9, okay? Most of Book 9 is what is a person that is a tyrannical soul. We know what it looks like on the outside. You got this one guy and he's giving everybody orders and he's organizing society for him. But what does it look like inside you? That's Book 9. I think we've answered what his opinion of the democratic city and the democratic man is pretty well. It's not positive. So he says, you know, we all have desires, and some of them are not good. And most of us either because we're actually good people or because through force of will or habit or peer pressure, we keep them in control, the negative ones. We don't just go take stuff because we like it. You know, most of us are restrained by law or morality to not just go steal things. But he said there's a time when the guardian is relaxed, the guardians of your appetites, and that's when you sleep. And then you dream. And he said there's nothing you won't do in a dream. I don't know if I totally agree with that. He does mention that, he talks about the good person, like saying good things to himself before he goes to sleep to like purify his dreams. I don't know. I've had some pretty nasty dreams, and you know, usually I'm not the perpetrator though. Usually I'm the perpetratee. It's happening to me in my bad dreams. So we know there's a state in which it's released, right? Does that make sense? There's a state in us when he says there's nothing you would hesitate to do in a dream. And he said, you know what? Tyrants let it loose while they're awake. That's why he says living a tyrannical life. Not, do you understand the difference? Not being a tyrant over other people, but letting your own appetites be a tyrant inside you. It's like living in a nightmare. Because it's the point at which all desires are released. You know those other forms of constitution? I told you the oligarchs, the Democrats have this ruling. The oligarchs have this ruling, desire for money. The Democrats have this ruling even more so. Like they don't just want necessary things, they want unnecessary things. Like I need food, but I don't need caviar. I need to drink, but I don't need champagne. You see, like we want better and better and better. The tyrant does all that and doesn't care what he does to get it. He's willing to break the law. At least the democratic person has some semblance of, well, maybe I shouldn't. I really want to, but maybe I shouldn't, you know. And the tyrant's like, okay, what are you going to do about it? Don't care anymore. And Socrates says, it's like you're living in a nightmare now. Because all your deepest desires, just like in a nightmare and dreams, have been let loose on your soul. Yes? Mm. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And but I forgot the specific part of your brain. So yeah, there is like science backs that up.
Do you know what? Oh, go ahead.
Another reason you're just free to kind of
Yes.
basic your life.
And you can come back from it. So my daughter, I don't know. We'll get done. It's okay. My daughter, my oldest daughter, has taken an interest in what's it called? Lucid Dreaming. So that you can become aware that you are dreaming in the dream, and you can manipulate the dream. And it sounds, it's not like a cultish or anything. It's just a mental exercise because you can do stuff. You can just you learn to turn the switch on of control. And so she read a book on it, and there's practices you do. It's very much because it sounds like Inception. And I said, did they get that? You know, that you have a thing. Like a spot you check or something, and you look to see, is it real or is it a dream? That's really a thing. And so she's learned, she's had 3 lucid dreams, and she said she can make herself, she said at the beginning though, you go, like you're in an office, and you want to go out the door. And you realize you're dreaming. You get to the point where you realize you've checked and you've looked, and okay, this is a dream. Now I'm walking out that door. I'm in control of the dream now. And she said, but you will go out the door and it will just, either it will become hazy, like edgy, unfinished parts of a video game or something like that, or it will throw you back into the office. You will just walk through and you'll be back. And your brain's like, no, this is a dream. I'm doing the dream to you. And then you're like, no, I'm doing the dream now. And it takes time, and so she's training herself. I think it's the coolest thing. So she said she was laying in her bed, and she rolled over, and she looked. She didn't think she had fallen asleep, but she looked, and there was an electrical outlet on the wall, but there is none. And that was her tip-off. She said, I am in bed, but I am not rolled over looking at this wall. There's no outlet on my wall. And that was the the thing that tipped her off that she was in a dream. But anyway, she's experimenting with it. But yes. So, but see, that gives me hope that the tyrannical person, maybe there's a way you can come back from that. When all your desires have been let loose, and I would say as Christians, we would say not without God's grace, obviously. I don't recommend you trying to just pull yourself up by your own bootstraps and straighten out your life without the Lord, obviously. But that by His grace, we can take control of that living nightmare, and He can, through us, turn it into something beautiful. And, unfortunately, Socrates and Plato didn't have access to that, and we didn't have that hope, which is what makes it sad. I mean, interesting to read this, but sad to read this. So he talks about the 3 parts of the soul again. I feel like we've talked about that a lot. And he says, after he proves that being a tyrant is like living in a nightmare, he says, I feel like we've proven that justice is not less profitable than injustice. Because who wants to live in a nightmare? No one. Even if no one sees you do it. Remember the ring that can turn you invisible, and then no one's going to know you're being unjust? But you have let a monster, I don't remember if it's in book 9 or book 10, but I'm just going to go there because I didn't ask you a question about it. He says, imagine a multi-headed monster. Every monster, the Chimera and Scylla and Charybdis and everything that you've ever heard of, and then a lion, and then a human being. And so this is what he likens your appetites and your spirited part, the lion, and your human beingness. And he said, being a tyrant is like feeding all the heads of the multi-headed monster, till it shreds apart the lion and eats the human being. And it's all happening inside your own soul. And then he says, you tell me, is that a good life or is that a bad life? And obviously his friends say, oh, that's a terrible life, Socrates. And I agree, to just be carried away by whatever you want with no restraint. But, we do live in a world where they take freedom, like the word freedom equals license. License means you're allowed to do what you want. Freedom, according to our founding fathers, said we are free to do what? To pursue happiness, but not frivolity and desires. Happiness being, as these guys read all this stuff, John Adams and Jefferson and they were raised on this. And what is happiness? Happiness is pursuing a good life, an orderly life, taking care of your own, pursuing wisdom. Happiness was the philosophical life for them. But I don't see a lot of philosophical people around me today. Yeah, Matthew.
John Adams said that our Constitution is made for a religious people.
It is.
Because if it's just like there's no religion, it's kind of just like complete tyranny, like individual tyranny. You will take that freedom and you bring it to like senselessness, it's pure liberty, and you won't do anything.
Yes.
It's only freedom from stuff, never freedom to stuff.
Yes. Which proves Socrates' point. How do children grow up learning to do this? Because, well, they see their parents living that way, but they're not shown anything better. You take your children and you show them the good and the true and the beautiful, so that hopefully they will learn to love it. But if we don't do that, if we show them the gruesome and the ugly and the degenerate in schools, they will become like it. Yeah, Ethan.
I wouldn't say that necessarily our Constitution is based on religion. Like, Christianity isn't a religion. It's not a religion. People ask me, well, I'm Christian. You think Christianity is a religion? No, you're a religion. The problem, religion is by definition, is a means or ground for a supernatural
Well, and I've heard people say that too. Of course, on the flip side, I'll let Karsten in a minute, but on the flip side, if I want to have a relationship with you, I would need to do certain things, wouldn't I? I would need to be with you, and I would need to listen to you, and be available to you when, and you would listen to me, and we would have some sort of understanding between each other that we are, friends or whatever. And it would take time. And so, likewise, we sometimes talk about cultivating a relationship with Jesus, but what does that look like? Well, it means actual things done, doesn't it? It means time spent in prayer. It means time spent in His Word. It means time sitting in His presence. And it means attending services where we corporately worship Him, right? And I think, so I don't disagree. It is a relationship. It is much bigger than we think. Jesus did not, well, okay, I'm not going to go there. I'm going to start preaching now. But it is bounded. So they say, it's kind of unsure, but that it comes from religio, which means to bind. And so religion binds you to a certain a belief system or group of people. And in that sense, I feel like Christianity does that, because I have bound myself. Like, I have signed up for God's service, and there is no turning back. Do you know what I mean? I put the hand to the plow, and I'm not looking back. And I have bound myself to be available to Him in relationship. And I can't say, but I'm too busy, God. I can't. But it's my favorite TV show tonight. You know that. And then think I'm going to maintain that relationship. So, and that's where it gets dicey, because then you have people, sort of new agey people, who want to just have all spiritual. Do you know what I mean? And then you have people over here that are all material. Like, if I go through the motions, I'm good. But somewhere in the middle is the truth that we do have motions we have to go through. And frankly, sometimes we pray when we're not really feeling it. Just like if you were my friend and you called, I might not really be wanting to sit and listen to your problems or your woes or maybe even your joys right now, but I'm going to do it because you're my friend and I'm available to you. Yeah, Karsten and then Alex. Which I think was what Ethan was going for, that it's not, that Christianity is more than an ethical system or a system of morality. It is, okay, I like that. Yes.
But for morality,
It's not just checking off the moral boxes. Exactly. Yeah, Alex.
So you know how tyranny has been referred to,
Fine.
how tyranny has been referred to as just an undemocratic selection of a leader. Like a leader takes
Yes,
power. It doesn't
yes.
necessarily mean bad, but when did it change from being a
This is an excellent question, and I don't know the answer. Don't tell anyone I don't know everything.
In the Republic, I could be completely wrong. Would be kind of like the Romans, and when Caesar kind of took over.
But he's using it right here in a negative sense.
Well, yeah, but like when it was in the West, when it really became really,
Yeah.
really profound. That's
Here,
always mine.
here's my guess. I don't dispute what you're saying at all, because I mean there's a process to what we say today as tyrant, but he's using it in a negative sense. I think that tyranny, in say Solon time or before Pisistratus, because there were other tyrants in Solon, that it technically the definition is taking power unconstitutionally, but in practice, those who did tended to act harshly and negatively. And so, you know how we have things where the definition means one thing? They call it the denotation, but the connotation means something negative. Does that make sense? So you could have a thing, an office. Okay, he has taken power unconstitutionally. He's called a tyrant. But then you have enough examples of them abusing that power that they've taken that it morphs into. And so Plato is writing this. We're thinking maybe, almost maybe even 150 years after Pisistratus. So we have a time period here for them to see lots of tyrannies and to see what happens. But this is just me guessing though, okay? But I know the modern view, I'm sure I agree with Matthew that over time, many, many examples of this sort of behavior led to us completely to define it as a mean, despotic, ruler, rather than just someone who doesn't happen to have power in a constitutional way.
Kind of like
Exactly. Because they abused the privilege and took more than they should. That's very good.
also they were French traders.
Yeah, because they were working with the Romans. Nobody liked that. Go ahead.
Also, like the United States, to an extent, they were kings.
Yes.
Well, associated with king at the time.
Yes, and king is not a bad thing. Like there have been many good kings. So, okay, I'm going to rush through these 3 ways that he proves that if your human part, your rational part is ruling, that's the best life possible. Okay, first is what we've already said. Tyrannical men live in a nightmare. That was his first proof. The second proof is if you quiz people, what is the best life? And you quiz someone who he's a democratical man, okay? He only follows his appetites. That's all he really knows. If you say, which is best, the honor-loving life, the philosophical life, or the pleasure life? He's going to say, the pleasure life, because he doesn't know any better. If you ask the honor-loving person, what is the best life? He's going to say, honor. He knows pleasure. We all do. Because we all have to eat or drink. And sometimes we all eat or drink to excess or something we don't need. Okay. And so he's going to say, well, this life is. See, because these are the only 2 things he knows. But if you ask the philosophical man what's the best, he's the only one who knows all 3. So if you want to know what's best, you have to ask someone who knows all 3 and can compare them. It's a cute little argument. I like it. It might not persuade you, but it's nice and neat. And then his last argument is that, remember the last time you were sick. Okay, no, remember right before you got sick. Pretend, if this wasn't the case, that it was rainy, it was nasty, you're tired, you didn't sleep very well, you got tons of schoolwork to do. What is with Mrs. Ferguson? All these pages and pages, oh my gosh! Life is just, ugh! And then you got sick. And you laid in bed for a few days, had fever. It was really crummy. You were here, and then you dropped down here, right? When you get better, doesn't everything just seem wonderful? Oh, I'm not coughing, and my head doesn't. Life is so wonderful. It's the same that it was before you got sick. You still have the same amount of work, and it's still raining outside, but it just seems better. Does that make sense? And Socrates says most of us, not in sickness, but sort of in our levels, live on the 2 lower levels, right? So all we know is pleasure is being released from the pain. If you've ever had a bad injury, you know how wonderful it is when the pain goes away. Or you've had oral surgery, the wisdom teeth, and they give you the drugs, what I mean? It's like the pain has gone away. And so people, he said, mistake this level for the best level because it's all they know. It seems so much better than this. And they never take the elevator to the top floor. They don't know. And so they live on these 2 levels and they just can't judge the top level. When they're spiritually or emotionally ill and they get better, they think they're better. But they're not. They're only medium. They're only mediocre. And I got to read something to you guys. This struck me like never before, and so I brought my Bible to look it up. He says this. Oh, I'm on page 257. And I'm right by the number 586. Therefore, those who have no experience of reason or virtue, but are always occupied with feasts and the like, are brought down and then back up to the middle, as it seems, and wander in this way throughout their lives, never reaching beyond this to what is truly higher up, never looking up at it or being brought up to it, and so they aren't filled with that which really is, and never taste any stable or pure pleasure. Instead, they always look down at the ground like cattle. And this line kills me. And with their heads bent over their dinner table, they feed, fatten, and fornicate. Wow. To outdo others in these things, they kick and butt them with iron horns and hooves, killing each other because their desires are insatiable. For the part that they're trying to fill is like a vessel full of holes, and neither it nor the things they are trying to fill it with are among the things that are. And it's in my head, I looked it up, so I didn't have to look it up here. Okay. Haggai, chapter 1. You eat but never have enough. You drink but never have your fill. You put on clothes but are not warm. You earn wages only to put them in a purse with holes in it. The prophets are saying the same the same thing to Israel when Israel went off the rails, and started bringing in idols of Baal and stuff. Socrates knew. This is stunning to me. There's a part of you that needs filled, and that stuff won't fill it. Unfortunately, Socrates didn't, like I said, cut him slack. Without revelation from God, he didn't know what it was, but he knew it was something better. He knew it was something beyond the things that he could see. And that's what those people are trying to fill. It's just a stunning, amazing that they both said, you're trying to fill it. But it's not fillable with the stuff you're filling it with. Okay, so I want to talk about Aristotle too, so I apologize. I don't know, I'm angsting already about doing this 4 years from now, whether we should take longer and go through Republic slower and bump some Aristotle. I don't know. Maybe you guys can vote, like when our last thing, you can give me some feedback, not vote, because it's not a democracy. I'm in charge. So in book 10, Socrates says, aren't we glad we didn't bring playwriters into our city? And they say, well, why? I guess, but tell us more, Socrates. And he says, well, think about the form of a bed. Okay. And then we have a real bed, and then we have a painting of a bed. Yes. And he said, okay, we've agreed that the form bed is the true bed. And the bed that is made by a craftsman is a copy of the thing that gives it bedness, all right? But then the painting of a bed is not even a painting of a thing that truly is. It's a painting of a copy. I know, you don't like it. It's okay, you don't have to like it. But this is better. Listen to this one. This way's better. So he says, if you're going to make a tool, who knows best about a tool? And they say, the person who uses the tool. That's the person who really knows the ins and outs. How must this tool be made? This is what I need this tool to do. Who knows second best about the tool? The person who makes it, because they have to consult with the user, right? The user says, I need a tool, it needs to be shaped like this, it needs to do this job, and the maker says, okay, I see what the point of the tool is, I can craft that for you. But someone who paints a picture of the tool, they don't have to know anything, just what it looks like. They have to know what it does, what it's called, what it's for, if it's a good one or a bad one, they know nothing. I feel like that's an argument I can relate to. So from that perspective, he says people who write plays or epic poetry, sorry, Homer, they can put whatever words they want to into people's mouths. They're just imitating people. They really don't have to know anything about what's true or good or beautiful. They're just imitating life. They're like picture painters. And if they imitate poorly, they give us bad ideas about the gods. But even when they imitate well, they're making us focus on something that doesn't really exist. That's his rationale for leaving them off. He also says, gets a little dig in about going to tragedies and crying, boo-hooing over your movie or whatever, you know, that, you know, when bad things happen in real life, I get that we grieve. I get that there's kind of a shock that sets in. But in general, we all, and I feel like today we think it's good, to sort of suck it up and carry on. I'm not saying bury it. I'm not saying don't go through the grieving process. But I'm saying there comes a time when you have to keep living, right? He talks about people that wallow in their self-pity, right? That's not healthy. He says, in real life, that's what we think is good. But then we go to these plays and we just, oh, Oedipus, you know. And he says, we're training people to break down, have emotional breakdowns, when then in real life we say, suck it up and carry on. Come on, life is still here. You got to keep going. We're training him to do something opposite. And then at the end of book 10, we hear about a guy who had an afterlife experience. He got killed on a battlefield. I don't know if he went into a coma or something, and he woke up 12 days later. They were just going to put him on the pyre. They were just going to obliterate him. And he said, I've been to the afterlife, and I was sent back to warn you what happens. So you go, and then they sort you out by whether you lived a just life or an unjust life, and the good people go upwards and the bad people go downwards, and they stay there for 1,000 years. And you have to pay whatever unjust things you did, you pay it back 10 times worth. And whatever good things you did, you get paid back 10 times worth. After 1,000 years, they come back. And they all mill around this plane for a while, and they visit with each other. It's like, hey, Joe, how was it down there? Oh, it wasn't good. How was it up there? Oh, it was cool. All right, and they chat for a while. And then it's time for them to be sent back into new bodies. It's reincarnation. Socrates was a big supporter of reincarnation. Should have thrown that in with for your Jesus paper. Plato, I guess. He believes, well, as far as I can tell, Socrates taught that we don't actually ever learn anything, we just remember it. I do not find this convincing. But, there's a famous dialogue called the Meno, where he brings a slave over, and by asking him questions, he shows him how to figure out a geometrical problem. But he just says, well, wouldn't this, but he asks very leading questions. And I feel like it's debatable whether or not he's helping him to remember or whether he's not feeding him ideas. But that's what Socrates / Plato, okay, believe. So we have a world of reincarnation where they go and they pick new lives. And they tell them, there is a good life here for everyone. The first one who picks and the last one who picks. There's a good life available for everyone. But their choices tend to be based on whether or not they were philosophically minded in their previous life. Do you know what I mean? Like, good people go on to choose a good life, and then bad people choose another loser life? Yes.
This really seems like explaining it.
It's very odd. But so they come and so says, they didn't let him choose a life because he's going to get sent back to his normal life, right? Because he's not dead yet. And he says, so the first guy, he was a jerk. He went and he picked the life of a tyrant, where he was going to do all sorts of terrible things, but he was going to have lots of power and money. Bad choice. And by the way, they choose in order of a lottery system. Like you pick a number, and then you get to choose in that order. So, yeah, he says their choice depended upon the character of their former life. And this is so funny. I'm sorry. It's funny. The 20th soul chose the life of a lion, because you can go into an animal too. That was the soul of Ajax, son of Telamon. He avoided human life because he remembered the judgment about the armor. The next soul was that of Agamemnon, whose sufferings also had made him hate the human race, and so he changed to the life of an eagle. And very close to last, he saw the soul of the ridiculous Thersites. Do you remember who Thersites is? He's the jerk guy in the Iliad that keeps insulting Agamemnon, and Odysseus whacks him and says, "Shut up, no one's listening to you." I don't even remember if you remember that part. He chose the life of a monkey. And now it chanced that the soul of Odysseus got to make its choice last of all. And since memory of its former sufferings had relieved its love of honor, it went around for a long time looking for the life of a private individual who did his own work, and with difficulty it found one lying off somewhere neglected by the others. He chose it gladly and said that he'd have made the same choice even if he'd been first. Because Odysseus, being very honor-loving, he learned his lesson that sometimes that gets you into scrapes. I just want to be a nobody who does my own work next life. I don't want to be king of Ithaca. I don't want to be a star in the Trojan War. I just want to be nobody. So we need to follow justice for its own sake, not only because it gives us a nightmare life in this world, but it induces us to make poor choices for our next life. That's not something you need to take away from this class, because we all concur there is a next life, but you know what I mean, not like he means. There's an afterlife. That's the Republic. And I don't know if he convinces you, aside from morality and God's law, that justice is just good for you. But this has been a very pivotal book, you know, in the history of the world, that people have thought about these arguments. And I think we can all agree that he brings up interesting questions, even if you don't like his answers or agree with his answers. Now, Aristotle, as we looked at the School of Athens, he did not agree with his great teacher Plato. Aristotle was not from Athens. He was from the north of Greece. And in fact, this is why he got called back to Macedonia to become the tutor of Alexander the Great. Aristotle was Alexander's teacher. And Aristotle went back. Plato's followers had already founded, I always mix these up, I think Plato's is called the Academy. And Aristotle started a school called the Lyceum. His followers. And he was very concerned, as we said, with particular things, particular acts. For example, Socrates, Plato's all about justice as a concept. Do you notice he never really makes a list of these acts are just and these acts are not just? It's just a concept. Aristotle is very concerned with, well, what is it? Give me an example. All your brouhaha about forms doesn't do me any good. I want to know what I'm supposed to do. So he wrote on just a bajillion things. I mean, I told you about his book on rhetoric and the poetics. He wrote basically the first logic books, formal logic that we have was more or less invented by Aristotle. He wrote about natural science. He studied plants and animals. They say Alexander sent him samples as he was like conquering the world. I'm sorry, what did you say, Matthew? Physics, yes. And morality, ethics, what we would call ethics. And so he wrote a book called Nicomachean Ethics. Now, Nicomachus is his father, and it is also the name of his son. We do not know for which of them this book is named, but obviously he named it either in honor of his father who taught him these things, or in honor of his son whom he hopes to influence by writing this book and teach him how to live a good life. So he's not so concerned about what is the good, but what's a good life look like? Like what are good things? And so I want to just give you a couple of warnings, okay? It's like it's never good when I give you an assignment and I give you warnings. Oh crud, and we didn't even talk about your paper. Okay, but before I talk about Aristotle, here's what I did with yesterday's class. 2 weeks. You have 2 weeks to write the paper. And I asked you last week that you were going to say whether or not Christians agree with his views on justice, the good, and the purpose of life. I noticed on my next page where I write notes to myself, I had written, are Socrates' views acceptable to Christians? You may expand this paper. Are Socrates' views acceptable to Christians? Are they compatible? You do not have to only limit yourself to the good justice, and the purpose of life. But you may use those as a guide for asking yourself questions. I am sorry, I need to tell you about Aristotle, but you have 2 weeks to write this paper, all right? So that means if you just start writing down more ideas this week and you don't write anything, you'd be fine, all right? And we'll talk about it next week. Are we okay with that? I'm sorry. But 2 weeks, all right? And anything and everything that we've talked about. And I said Socrates, but you can say Plato. You can equate those. But anyway, when you read, so at least think about it and maybe rough out an outline for it, okay, this week, if you don't do any writing. Yes, Carl, you look like. Are Socrates' views acceptable to Christians? Are they compatible with Christianity? Okay, so your warning about Aristotle is A, he's tough. I feel like the Republic, most of the time it's not hard to figure out what Plato is saying. I mean, sometimes you have to slow down and follow his argument a little bit. Most of the time you know what they're saying. So Aristotle can be tough. As far as we know, what we have from Aristotle is his lecture notes. So, I know, it's not as bad as it sounds. I mean, it's complete sentences and everything, but it can be harder to follow. So you are reading roughly 47, 48 pages for next week. So it's a lot shorter, all right? And you're reading book 1 and book 2 of the Ethics. Book 1 is harder. It's hard. It's worse than book 2. 2 things to keep in mind. 1, when Aristotle, and I think it's your first question I asked you, when Aristotle talks about something being the end, he does not mean the completion or the finish. He means the goal. Every time he uses the word end, I bet I can say every time, he means the goal, the point, not the end, finish, all right? So the end of Jesus' coming to earth was to save us from our sins. It didn't mean it. Stop. It means the goal and the meaning, the point. So keep that in mind. That will, every time you see end, say the goal, the point, and that will help you. Yeah, yes. The second thing is, he is going to tell you that in his opinion, the highest happiness is found in politics. And this is why, because he doesn't mean what we mean. Polites means a citizen of a polis, okay, a citizen of a city-state. He means life together as a society. He doesn't mean only what we mean by politics, like making laws and running for office. He means the fact that people are designed to be social people. Even those of us who may be introverted, I mean, we still need other people. It is not good for man to be alone. I know I'm taking that out of context, but it isn't. I mean, in general, even the most hermitish of us want a friend, all right? And so he's saying this is by nature who we are, and so the highest pleasures and happinesses are found as we interact with each other. Also, it's hard to exercise virtues by yourself. Think about it. It's easy, I mean, it's easy or it's hard. It's almost impossible sometimes. In other words, I can't be charitable or loving or forgiving without someone to be charitable towards or love or forgive, right? I can't be patient unless you're doing something to make me need to be patient, or my environment is doing something. So keep those things in mind. He does not mean everybody has to run for office and everybody has to hold office when he says politics. He means being sociable, living together as a society. End means goal, and if you get strung up on book 1, so it's divided into chapters, and the chapters, some of them are only like a quarter of a page. The longest ones are maybe a page and a half, and they have headings. It tells you what he's going to talk about in this little section, and if you read a section and you say, I don't know what the heck he just said, don't worry, just read the next section, and you'll catch up. Like it'll become clear. Like there's still portions of this book that I'm like, yeah, I don't really know what point of that is. But then I catch on again. Do you know what I mean? I catch his train of thought. But when you get to book 2, it's very obvious because he talks about what is courage. Well, this is, you're a coward if you're not courageous enough, and you're rash if you're 2. And he talks about the spectrum of all the virtues, and it will be very easy to follow. So that's my advice. Don't give up. This book is too hard for me. Just read it, understand what you can, and move on. All right? All right, thank you. Go have lunch. See you next week. Oh, you're welcome.